So you have SIBO. What diet should you follow? Stay tuned and we're going to talk all about your options and what I've found the most success with. I'm Dr. Shelley Meyer. Welcome to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me. If it's your first time here, thanks so much. I would love it if you could subscribe and like this video so that the channel could continue to grow. If you're coming back, thanks so much for coming back. I really appreciate your support. I'm a functional medicine doctor, family doctor, and a registered dietitian, and I share a lot of information here about functional medicine, gut health, done a lot of hormone health topics if you're interested in that. But I'm starting a new series. This is the second out of the series on SIBO. I've been doing a lot of SIBO treatment. I've done a lot of advanced training in SIBO, and it is something that we see a lot in functional medicine, so I thought it was important to cover it a bit more in depth on this channel. So thanks so much for joining me. If you didn't check out the last video on methane SIBO, please check that out because that is an update to a prior video that was viewed a lot, and I think it's important to update it. So welcome. We're going to talk about diet today. There's not, just like for weight loss, there's not one specific diet that works for everyone. So don't turn the video off. Stay tuned because I am going to talk about different options. But there have been different options that have been proposed. And even in my prior videos, when I talked about the 5R approach and I talked about different elimination diets, yes, those do work and they can work for SIBO. I've seen them work, amazingly for lower intestinal, the microbiome disruption. So I've seen gluten-free, corn-free, dairy-free, low sugar, all work. Sometimes it's not all of those things, but we will combine a lot of individualized approaches. And I have seen those work for low intestinal bacterial overgrowth or dysbiosis, and I have seen them work for SIBO too. But they don't have as much of a efficacy or effectiveness as some of these others. So let's talk about some other options. Paleo, I'm sure you've heard of. That actually has about 40 to 50% effectiveness in SIBO. So you could, if you are already on paleo or have been considering starting paleo, you could combine that with, if you're having methane SIBO, like the treatments I talked about last week, or some of the options I'll talk about in the upcoming videos. And I do have my free PDF, the 10 tips to beat SIBO, so that can give you even more information. So you could try that. Now we have some better effectiveness or efficacy with the low FODMAP diet. I have talked about that in previous videos. I've seen success with that a lot with gas and bloating and dysbiosis, like the microbiome disruptions. So you could try that. Monash University, I will put their link below. They're like the experts in FODMAP, so they're a great resource, and they have an app that you can use, and that helps you to choose your foods on a day-to-day basis. And it's basically a low fermenting diet. There's also the specific carbohydrate diet, which means these are all kind of lower carb and lower carbish diets, because we find that carbohydrates do cause fermentation and bloating and gas or constipation or diarrhea as well, with SIBO being the main driver, those symptoms being the main driver of when people seek care for SIBO. So specific carbohydrate diet, that has about a 60% to 75% effectiveness rate for SIBO. And then when you start talking about who I trained with or did some training under, Dr. Allison Seebecker, who's a naturopath that is an expert in SIBO, she has kind of combined, and Dr. Neer Jacoby, sorry, I forgot your first name wrong, but she's called the SIBO Doctor online, and she also has worked with Dr. Seebecker too and came up with the biphasic SIBO plan. So both of these options are available. Dr. Seebecker's is on SIBOinfo.com, and then for Dr. Jacoby, you can look at the SIBOdoctor.com, I think it is. So I'm not, stealing their secret sauce. They have this stuff available, and I'm just saying that I've had some success with now transitioning over to that. It depends on the person, though. That's why it's really great to work with a provider, and I highly recommend you work with a provider and that you don't apply any of the pharmaceutical or supplement changes without talking to your provider, because this is not medical advice here on this channel. So I always individualize it based on the person, but these are some starting points that you could pursue if you don't have a provider who can do the diet part of it. So I'm going to share with you on the screen here the SIBO specific food guide, which is what Dr. Seebecker uses. it combines low FODMAP with a specific carbohydrate diet. So it can be a little tricky to follow, and you do have to pay attention because some things will be on the illegal part, which is all the way to the right there, and still be on the legal part, meaning, or on the, high FODMAP legal part, meaning they're in certain amounts you could have them, and in smaller amounts they could be more legal, let's call it. So let's start with the first question, which isn't on the SIBO specific food guide that I'm going to share with you. Grains. Most of my patients ask me about grains. This diet is a low grain diet, so that's why paleo kind of fits well with SIBO. So rice is okay in smaller amounts. Sometimes quinoa is okay. You really have to test that and see, but you really want to leave out other grains while doing this diet. It's not a forever diet. You probably want to adopt some version of it forever because, as I said in my last video, 2/3 of SIBO sufferers are chronic, meaning they may have a recurrence. So the more you can pay attention to your body and know which of these triggers you and avoid them. We can't all be perfect. Of course, we're going to have sugar. Of course, we're going to have bread again in our lives. But just pay attention to what feels good to you and nourishing. And if you find your SIBO symptoms come back from a food that's on the illegal list, then leave that out. So the grains are kind of limited, but you could make some grains or have grains from some of the things that we're going to consider illegal here. So on vegetables, I'm not going to read the whole list to you because you can read it, and I'll put a link to the SIBOinfo.com site. But there's quite a bit of vegetables in the legal. Now, when we talk about the moving more to the right as they become more illegal, we go from low FODMAP, low SCD, irritating, to moderate. Then you're going to see things like asparagus and artichoke hearts and butternut squash and cabbage, some of those gas-forming kind of veggies, sometimes even tomatoes and spinach and leeks and parsnips. Be an issue for some people. You do want to pay attention to the servings. And then as we get more towards those red foods, we see a higher amount of asparagus. That's what I mean. Like, you can have a little bit of asparagus, but if you go a higher amount, 1 spear may be okay, 4 spears may be too much. Avocado, people are always surprised by, but if you've done FODMAPs, you know that avocados can be fermenting, as well as artichokes. We use them as prebiotics, the artichokes at least. And avocados can be too. They have some prebiotic fiber. So because their fiber content, they can be, or the types of fiber, they can be fermenting. Broccoli. Now, broccoli's over on the legal, then it's on the higher FODMAP too. So it's all a matter of amounts. So broccoli at 1/2 cup may be okay with you. Broccoli at 1 cup may be triggering for you. So, and then Brussels sprouts can be quite triggering. So you do want to stick with a smaller amount, 2 of those on the more green legal, versus getting more towards the illegal would be 6 of them. So maybe somewhere in between is a happy place for you. Cauliflower also pretty much in any amount can be more fermenting. So you do want to pay attention to that. There's a lot of items out there made with cauliflower now, as we know, if we're eating low carb. I love cauliflower pizza. My favorite pizza place now has cauliflower crust. I do okay with it. I don't seem to have SIBO. I've had symptoms of it before. My thing has been more dysbiosis in the lower intestine, but I always keep my eyes open for how I feel after eating a cauliflower, kind of a cauliflower heavy ingredient. Garlic, as you know, if you've done low FODMAPs, can be triggering, but not that garlic I talked about for treatment for SIBO, the Allicin garlic. That is an extract. It's usually pretty well tolerated. It doesn't have all the fibers in it, obviously. Celery can be triggering. That's always surprising for people. Onions, usually people know that if they're triggered by onions. Mushrooms, yes, those can be fermenting. Scallions, shallots, I'll let you read this on your own. Zucchini sometimes. But I do want to highlight the illegal ones, which are bean sprouts, corn, okra, potato, even sweet potato, starch powders, arrowroot, corn, so cornstarch, arrowroot starch, potato starch, rice starch, and tapioca starch. If you've been eating gluten-free for a long time like I do, you probably know there's a lot of tapioca ingredients in the gluten-free. So pay attention if you're having gut problems, could be the tapioca. I also have seen people react to cassava flour. So pay attention to that. Not everybody reacts, but it's a prebiotic, and what the prebiotics do is feed our good bacteria. So they're going to feed the imbalanced bacteria too. Yucca, is another one, yams, and canned veggies. So do pay attention to that. I can't read all of these one by one. I'm going to show them because it's going to be a long video otherwise. But fruits. So there are some fruits, as I've talked about before when I've talked about FODMAP's diet, that are more fermenting. Avocado is technically a fruit, even though I read it on the vegetable one, so that can be fermenting. Any of the pit kind of fruits could be peaches, apricots, and then you have like plums and papayas, dried papaya in particular, pomegranates. I love pomegranates. It's just if you had a whole pomegranate, it could be a bit rough. So not a lot of people are eating a half a cup full of seeds of pomegranate, but it's a delicious fruit. So just watch your amounts of it. Watermelon is one that always surprises people. Berries in larger amounts. Blueberry's a great berry. Blackberry's a great berry. Raspberry's a great berry. They are all low sugar and really great in antioxidants. But if you have a lot of them, they could be, fermenting, but they are on the more legal green list in smaller amounts, in the more reasonable amounts, which most of us aren't eating 80, blueberries. So, and then the really illegal fruits, surprising, is plantain is the main one. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you probably, if you're watching this video, you've had some gut experiences where you've had some plantains and felt terrible after, or you've had a mixed meal that maybe had plantains in it. You're like, oh, now I know it was the plantains. And jams and jellies, those are very sugar dense. Sugar is very fermenting. We use sugar as an ingredient that you drink ahead of time for the SIBO test, the breath test I was talking about, to produce fermentation to show us in the test. So anything high in sugar can be very hard to tolerate when you have SIBO. All right, moving on. So legumes and beans. So beans get a bad reputation for gas, but they're not all bad. In smaller amounts, lentils could be okay, and half a cup, and lima beans. But, as the more kind of red beans and navy beans and white beans and baked beans are more towards the more fermenting illegal. And the really illegal are butter beans, cannellini, chickpea, favas, pintos, and soybeans. So soybeans, people always ask, does that rule out tofu? Well, yeah, if you're looking at the FODMAP diet, soy in its fermented tofu form, because of its fermentation, then can trigger more fermentation. It's not a forever thing. I tolerate tofu just fine, but I've had times in my life that I can remember where it can be fermenting for me, for my gut, if my gut's not in a good place. Nuts and seeds, big fan of nuts and seeds for your health. I talk about them a lot as far as protein and minerals and fiber and balancing your hormones. But you do want to pay attention to amounts. So you don't want to overdo almonds, like keep them to 10. You don't want to overdo pecans. You can have some pecans, not too many. But like some of the ones that are more fermenting are cashews, hazelnuts, pine nuts, pistachios, pumpkin seeds, which I love, sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, and then chia seeds can be very fermenting or SCD illegal, and coconut milk with the thickeners. Now people always ask me, well, what milk can I have then? You just want to look at thickeners. So if any of your milk substitutes have guar gum, carrageenan in them, then leave those out. So with your dairy, that brings us to milks and dairy. We do want to be really, really careful with dairy and leave conventional regular milk out, as well as cream cheese, not dry curd cottage cheese, okay, but that can't really find that in the stores. Regular cottage cheese, leave that out. Fresh mozzarella, ricotta, leave those out. So those softer cheeses, they're just more fermenting and gas forming. Kefir is very gas forming, although good for your gut in some ways. You got to get the gut balanced first. Cream and sour cream and commercial yogurt. If you do a homemade 10, 12-hour overnight yogurt, preferably 24-hour, that's better tolerated. If you can't do that at home, and you want to have some yogurt, then, you know, trying one of the other alternative yogurts like almond or coconut could be okay. But if it, sometimes with the fermentation of any of those, with the active cultures in there, those are good bacteria. They're going to, like, probiotics might potentially feed your bad bacteria if you're feeling bad. So if they cause gas, leave them out. And then lactose-free yogurt might be okay. But it still could be pretty fermenting for you. Butter, generally, grass-fed butter is okay. Ghee, homemade sour cream, but I'm not making homemade sour cream. You guys might be. And then lactose-free cream or milk could be okay. Proteins and meats, you've got a lot of good options. I'm vegetarian, but if you're a meat eater, you got a lot of good option. Bacon, broth, beef, eggs, fish, game, lamb, organ meats, pork, poultry, seafood. Bacon with sugar, you want to be careful of. Bone broth, homemade bone broth with cartilage. Surprising, people think, oh, that's so good for me, and it can be. It's got a lot of good it's got a lot of good amino acids, but it can also be fermenting for some people. Now, the really bad guys in this category for SIBO are bacon with high fructose corn syrup. Please stay away from that anyway. Never add that back, please. Deli processed meats, please don't add those back either. Really bad for you. And then, so any kind of meats with those ingredients I talked about, like carrageenan and high FODMAP, or the sugars in them, you want to leave it out. And sweeteners, that brings us to sweeteners. There's a lot of sweeteners on the illegal list. I'm super sorry to tell you this, because I know our world runs on sugar. So I'm not going to list all the bad ones, just let's say the good ones. Let's be positive here. Now, on Dr. Seebecker's list, she says aspartame is okay. She's not promoting aspartame, and neither am I. NutraSweet, I don't think that's good for you. It can be very bad for your microbiome, but it doesn't ferment like some of these others. Glucose and dextrose in their pure form, whereas sucrose, which is sugar, not okay, but glucose and dextrose, okay. Honey, the alfalfa, cotton clover, or raspberry in smaller amounts. The other kinds of honey, as you go into like acacia and sage and Tupelo honey, despite what the Grateful Dead says, that is not so good for our gut. And then saccharin doesn't ferment, but not good for you. Stevia without inulin. Inulin is a prebiotic that can be really, really gas producing, but a pure stevia is the healthiest option in addition to the certain types of the honey in this category. Watch out for those kind of in the keto world, or sometimes in the paleo world, they'll use the sugar alcohols. Those can make you feel really bad. They can be very fermenting. And then drinks, you know, you've got your coffees, okay, weaker coffees better, and small amounts. If you have reflux, coffee may not be your friend. Some of the juices, small amounts diluted, are okay. Black tea, any of the like herbal teas usually are okay. Green tea, it pushes a little bit into the next category, so it's preferred that people do less than 2 cups a day on green tea if they're having issues. And then there's always and water, of course, is okay. There's always the question about alcohol. You know, the less the better for your gut and for so many other things. If you haven't checked out the Huberman Labs podcast ever, they have a really good one on alcohol and how dangerous and bad it can be for us, even in small amounts. But separate subject. But as far as fermenting, the big fermenters, kind of bad, pretty bad is rum. And then we've got the really bad beer, brandy, hard cider, liquors like cordials, rum, dark rum, sherry, tequila, and dessert wines that are more sugary. In the okay category, you've got some wines, as long as you tolerate wine, okay, but not the sweet kind like port or sparkling or sake, which I guess is a wine. Whiskey, scotch is okay, vodka, gin, bourbon in small amounts. Again, try to keep your alcohol to, just 1 ounce, 3 to 5 days a week or less. If you check out that Huberman Labs podcast, probably try to keep it to 0, but I know that's hard for people to accept sometimes. And with wine, definitely trying to keep that to 2 or 3 drinks a week is best. Forgot the fats. That's a good subject because they're all okay except soybean oil. I know. Like, I trained to be a dietitian in the 90s. Like, it's so hard for me to get past that dietitian in the 90s brain of fat being okay. And I've been past it for a while, but fat is okay. There are some people, for your cholesterol, if you are a fat responder, depending on your gene type, whole different subject, you may not do well with, higher fat. But as far as SIBO goes, pretty much all the fats are okay. So, silver lining for some people. All right, it's a long video. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. If you want your free PDF on the 10 tips to beat SIBO, please join my email list. I don't spam you with email. Thank you so much for joining me. If it's your first time, please like and subscribe. If you're returning, please like. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And then I will see you next time.